The first time I learned that I was worth $31.68 million was I sitting in a bank asking to borrow $7,500. That sentence still sounds strange when I say it out loud, but that is exactly how it happened. It was a cold morning, and I had brought three estimates for repairing the furnace in the house where I had lived for more than 20 years. Winter was coming, and the old system had started making a grinding sound whenever it turned on. I had delayed the repair because Marcus kept telling me that money was tighter than I realized. I believed him. Not because I was helpless. I was 70, retired, and perfectly capable of managing my daily life. I still drove, paid my expenses, worked in my garden, and kept the house in order. I had spent most of my career designing residential homes, and I could still look at a floor plan and understand exactly what was wrong with it. The house I was trying to keep warm was one of those homes. Thomas and I had designed it together before we moved in. After he died, I kept changing small things, but the structure remained almost exactly as we had planned. I knew where every pipe ran, where the electrical lines crossed, and which wall had been reinforced because of an old plumbing problem. When the repair technicians spread the HVAC diagram across the desk at the bank, I pointed to one section and explained that a particular line had been replaced 14 years earlier. I remembered because I had approved the revised plans myself. I want you to understand something about me before this story goes any further. I was not a confused old woman who had suddenly lost control of her life. I knew my house. I knew my finances as I understood them, and I trusted my son. That last part was the mistake. The loan officer was a woman named Laura. She entered my information into her computer while I waited. At first, everything looked ordinary. Then she stopped typing. She studied the screen, checked something, and asked whether I knew who currently had authority over my family trust. I told her that Marcus handled some of it. She asked whether I had intentionally given him permanent authority. That question caught me off guard. After Thomas died, Marcus had helped me with paperwork, taxes, insurance, and a long list of things I did not have the energy to deal with. I thought of it as my son helping his mother. I had never thought of that help as something that could change who controlled my affairs. Laura contacted the bank's trust department and compliance team. They verified my identity and my relationship to the trust before saying anything further. Then I learned something I had never expected. I was the primary lifetime beneficiary of a family trust worth approximately $31.68 million. I honestly thought there had been a mistake. Thomas had left us a good portfolio. I knew that. I knew we had investments, property, and savings. But nobody had ever told me that the trust connected to those assets was worth more than $31 million. I could not connect that number with the $7,500 loan application in front of me. I had walked into the bank worried about a furnace. Now I was being told that millions of dollars were being managed around me. Then Laura found something else. Marcus was listed as the distribution advisor. There was also a corporate co-trustee. More troubling, the trust's primary correspondence address was Marcus's home, not mine. Then the compliance review uncovered something that made the room feel suddenly smaller. An emergency guardianship petition involving me was already being processed. The filing date was the same day I had walked into the bank. I stared at the date for a long time. It was not an old document. It was happening now, and I had not been told. My first instinct was to call Marcus. I wanted his explanation. I wanted some simple answer that would let me leave embarrassed but relieved. But I did not call him. Instead, I asked Laura not to contact him yet. She assured me that she would make sure everything went through the proper compliance process. That was all. No accusation, no dramatic warning, just a process. I walked out of the bank with my 3 furnace estimates still tucked inside my folder. Nothing outside had changed. Cars moved through the parking lot, people carried coffee, a delivery truck backed into the building next door. But I no longer saw my situation the same way. I had come to borrow $7,500 to keep my own house warm. Somewhere inside a system I didn't know existed, someone was preparing to use millions of dollars connected to my name to decide where I would live and who would make decisions for me. I still didn't know how much money Marcus had taken. I didn't know what he had signed. I didn't know why he had filed for guardianship that day. But sitting in my car, I began to understand that the thing my son had been controlling for years might not have been my money. It might have been something much more important: my ability to choose. 8 years before I sat in the bank, my life looked very different. Thomas had just died, and I was still trying to understand what it meant to come home to a house that no longer had his voice in it. I had spent days moving between the funeral home, the hospital, insurance offices, and stacks of paperwork that seemed to multiply every time I opened an envelope. A few weeks after the funeral, I needed surgery. I was exhausted. Paying a bill felt like a task. Calling an insurance company felt like a battle. Sorting Thomas's tax documents was more than I wanted to face. That was when Marcus stepped in. He did not arrive asking about money. He did not talk about the trust. He did not tell me that I was too old to manage my affairs. He simply started helping. He paid bills when I was too tired to deal with them. He called the insurance company and waited on hold for me. He made appointments, picked up prescriptions, drove me home from the hospital, and brought groceries into the kitchen. When tax season came, he gathered the documents for the accountant. I remember one evening when he was standing at my kitchen counter, sorting a pile of envelopes, while I sat nearby with an ice pack on my shoulder. He looked at me and said, "Mom, let me take a few things off your plate." At the time, it sounded like love. I signed a temporary financial power of attorney so he could help me while I recovered. It was supposed to disappear once I was back on my feet. And for a while, that was how it felt. There was no dramatic moment when Marcus suddenly took control. That is not how it happened. It happened in small, reasonable steps. First, he suggested that paper bank statements were unnecessary. He said they were just clutter, and that online statements would be easier. I agreed. Then I asked him for the password to one of the accounts because I wanted to check something myself. He told me those financial websites were full of scams and that it was safer if he handled them. I accepted that too. A few months later, my pension began going into an account Marcus managed for household expenses. He explained that it would make things simpler. I did not object because the bills were being paid and I was still receiving what I needed. Then the roof started leaking. I needed money for repairs, and Marcus told me we should wait. He said the damage was manageable and that we should not make a large financial decision until things were more stable. So I waited. That became the pattern. Whenever I needed something expensive, I asked Marcus first. I did not think of it as asking permission. Not then. I thought I was asking my son for advice. Looking back, I can see how easily those two things can become the same thing when you stop checking for yourself. I also have to be honest about my own part in it. I stopped looking at statements carefully. I trusted Marcus more than I checked the numbers. I was still grieving Thomas, and I did not want to spend my days fighting banks, insurance companies, and financial websites. I thought I was giving my son a chance to help me. I did not realize I was slowly giving him the opportunity to make decisions without me. The change in my family happened in much the same way. My daughter, Claire, had always been close to me. After Thomas died, she called often. She worried about me, especially after my surgery. Marcus began making small comments about her. He said Claire was becoming too interested in what would happen to the family money. He suggested that some of her questions were not really about me. Then emails started appearing that seemed to confirm what he was saying. Some messages sounded impatient,
Others seemed to push me to make financial decisions before I was ready. I read them and believed they were from Claire. When she called, Marcus often explained that she was upset again or that she needed some space. I stopped answering as often. I thought I was protecting myself from family conflict. What I did not know was that Claire was still trying to reach me. I did not know how many times she had called. I did not know that some of those calls had been blocked. I did not know that there would be eventually more than 60 attempts to reach me over roughly a year. At the time, all I knew was that my daughter's calls had become less frequent. I thought she had stopped trying. That was one of the most painful mistakes of my life. Now, sitting in my car after leaving the bank 8 years later, I remembered something else Marcus used to tell me. "Mom, you don't need to worry about money." For years, I heard that as reassurance. That day, I finally heard the part I had missed. He never said I didn't have money. He was telling me that I didn't need to know. And there is a very big difference between those two things.
When I left the bank that morning, I still had no answers about Marcus. I only knew that an emergency guardianship petition had been filed the same day I asked for a $7,500 loan. Laura had advised me to speak with an attorney, so I called Daniel Brooks. Daniel had known Thomas for years. He had helped us with estate documents and understood how Thomas had structured our family finances. I brought him every document the bank had given me. He read the paperwork carefully, then gave me one instruction: don't change anything in the house yet. I did not understand why the house mattered. I was about to. Daniel arranged for 3 independent people to examine the situation: a locksmith, a licensed HVAC inspector, and an independent geriatric specialist. The purpose was simple. We needed to establish what was actually happening before anyone changed or cleaned up anything. The HVAC inspector arrived first. He examined the furnace, checked the controls, inspected the wiring, and looked at the service panel. I watched him move through the basement with the same quiet attention I had once used when inspecting houses during my career as an architect. Then he found the problem. The furnace had not simply stopped working. The main switch had been manually disconnected. There was no sign of the kind of mechanical failure described by the guardianship paperwork. The inspector could not tell us who had disconnected it or exactly when. He could only tell us what the equipment showed. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want to accuse my son without proof. Daniel asked whether Marcus had access to the house. I thought about the spare key. He had a key. That was all I could say. The locksmith checked the exterior doors and locks. Nothing had been forced. Nothing was broken. There was no obvious sign that a stranger had entered. It did not prove Marcus had been inside. It simply meant the house could have been entered by someone who already had authorized access. Then Daniel noticed something on my dining room table. It was an envelope I had never seen before. Inside was an admission packet from Brookstone Assisted Living. I remember sitting down when I saw it. The monthly fee was $11,800. There was a $32,000 community fee. The payment authorization listed my family trust, and the proposed move-in date was only a few days away. I had never toured Brookstone. I had never signed an agreement. I had never told Marcus that I wanted to move. Until then, the guardianship petition still felt like something happening on paper. The admission packet made it physical. Someone had already chosen a place for me. Someone had already calculated what it would cost, and someone had already decided which account would pay for it. Daniel reviewed the guardianship petition again. Marcus was asking for emergency temporary guardianship, medical authority, and financial authority. The petition also supported moving me into supervised housing. The evidence attached was a collection of photographs. There were pictures of my furnace, my thermostat, unopened mail, the kettle in my kitchen, and even photographs of me from 8 years earlier, around the time of my surgery. I studied those photographs. Some of what they showed was real. The paint in my hallway was old, there had been mail sitting unopened, the kettle had a dark mark from a time I had forgotten it on the stove, and the furnace was not working. But every photograph had been separated from the reason behind it. The old mail did not mean I couldn't manage my affairs. I had been waiting for information from my accountant before sorting through it. The kettle had burned because I had forgotten it while answering a phone call, and the furnace had been disconnected. Someone had taken ordinary, explainable problems and arranged them into a picture of a woman who could no longer care for herself. There was another detail that changed everything for me. Marcus had not filed the guardianship petition after learning about my trust that morning. The paperwork had already been prepared before I walked into the bank. Daniel believed the timing made sense if Marcus needed a court order before a planned trust transaction could be completed. That meant Marcus had not somehow predicted that I would discover the trust. He had been preparing for something already in motion. That evening, I stood in my own house and looked at the worn paint, the old kitchen chair, and the furnace that had suddenly become evidence. My home had been turned into photographs designed to tell strangers who I was. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I have never forgotten. They're not trying to prove you're old, they're trying to build a picture that you're incapable. I looked at the photographs again. For the first time, I understood that this was not going to be solved by explaining how hurt I was. I would have to show what was true. I looked at Daniel and gave him my answer. Then we need to show them who I actually am. Until that moment, I had been reacting to what was happening around me. After that, I stopped waiting for someone else to explain my life. I was going to take part in proving it. After I decided to prove who I actually was, Daniel told me there was someone else I needed to see. My daughter. He did not let me drive myself to Claire's house. I felt like I was going to meet a stranger. Claire had once been the person I called when anything happened, good or bad. After Thomas died, our closeness faded gradually. When Daniel and I arrived, Claire opened the door. She did not hug me, she did not step forward. She simply stood there and looked at me. Then she asked, "Why are you here?" I had imagined that moment many times during the drive. None of the answers sounded right anymore. So I told her the truth. Because I finally know I was wrong. She led us inside. There was no dramatic reconciliation. Claire brought a box from another room and placed it on the table between us. She had kept records. There were certified mail receipts, returned letters, screenshots, call logs, and copies of emails. Everything was dated and organized. The box looked like a case file. Then Claire showed me the call history. There were 67 attempts to reach me. Some calls had lasted only a few seconds. Others had gone unanswered completely. I recognized the number immediately. It was Claire's. For years, I had believed she had stopped calling. Now, I was looking at evidence that she had kept trying. The number had been blocked through the phone plan Marcus managed for me. I stared at the screen. Then she showed me two versions of an email. The first one appeared to have been written by her. It said that I was confused and that the family shares needed to be moved before I wasted everything. If I had received that message at the time, I would have believed Claire was trying to pressure me. But the second document came directly from the email provider's records. The original message said something completely different. Claire had written that she did not want anyone pressuring me while I was grieving and recovering from surgery. She wanted Thomas's estate and my financial decisions reviewed by her father and my attorney. The difference was not subtle. The message I had seen had been changed. Someone had taken Claire's concern and turned it into something that looked greedy. I did not need Claire to say Marcus's name. Then Claire told me what had happened after she kept trying to reach me. Marcus had contacted her employer. He told them she was attempting to take advantage of an older woman. He suggested that her interest in me was really about money. At that time, Claire was raising Noah on her own. She did not have the money to spend years fighting a legal battle against her own brother while trying to keep her job and raise a child. So she backed away. Not because she stopped loving me, because she believed there was no way to reach me. Then Claire opened another box. Inside were 17 letters. 17 letters I had written to her that had never reached her. She had letters too, letters she had written to me that had never reached my hands. We sat there looking at both piles. For years, I had believed my daughter had chosen to leave me. Claire had believed I had chosen Marcus over her. The truth was simpler and more painful. We had both been waiting for the other person to come back. Claire finally looked at me and said, "I thought you chose him." I could not defend myself. I could only answer, "I thought you chose to leave." Nothing could give us those years back. Then I heard footsteps from the hallway. Noah walked into the room. He was 15 years old. I had seen photographs of him, but photographs could not show me the years I had missed. He knew me mostly through stories. Stories about the grandmother who designed houses and loved old gardens. I listened to him talk about school, and I realized how much of his childhood I had never witnessed. It wasn't the money that hurt most. It was the time. 8 years of birthdays, school mornings, ordinary dinners, and conversations that should never have been lost. Claire placed the records back on the table. She did not ask me to forgive her. She did not ask me to forgive Marcus. She simply told me that if I really wanted to fight what was happening, we couldn't do it with anger or guesses. We needed records. She looked at the boxes and said, "If you really want to fight this, Mom, we fight it with records." For the first time since I left the bank, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Then let's find every record. That was the moment the story changed. Until then, I had been trying to understand what had happened to me. From that day forward, I was going to find out exactly what had happened to us. After Claire placed the boxes of records on the table, we spent the next several days going through them. I had thought the worst part would be seeing how much time we had lost. I was wrong. The numbers were worse. Laura had already told me that the bank could not release detailed trust information until I signed the proper authorization. Now that Daniel had reviewed the documents and I had authorized the records, Laura began sending us statements, transaction histories, and payment descriptions. The first recurring payment caught my attention because it appeared month after month. $36,500. The recipient was Hartwell Care Solutions, a company owned by Vanessa, Marcus's wife. The payment had been made every month for roughly 78 months. That was more than 6 years. The descriptions were almost reassuring on paper. Care coordination, property oversight, transportation, beneficiary support. The words sounded official. They sounded like services someone might reasonably need. Then I compared them with my own memory. Vanessa had visited me perhaps twice a month. Most visits lasted less than an hour. She had never provided bathing assistance. She had never spent an entire day supervising me. There had been no daily cognitive exercises, no regular personal care schedule, and no full-time supervision. I remembered most of those visits because I had usually made coffee for her. There was nothing in my life that looked like the level of care described by those invoices. Then we found one report that was harder to explain. It stated that I required assistance dressing and could not safely be left alone for more than 2 hours. I read that sentence several times. On the date listed in the report, I had been in my garage for most of the afternoon, working on a residential design I had been revising for a former client. I remembered the day because I had spent hours comparing measurements and correcting the placements of a staircase. Nobody had been supervising me. Nobody had helped me dress, and nobody had told me that I was supposedly incapable of being alone. That was when the paperwork stopped feeling like paperwork. It started looking like a version of my life that someone had written without me. Daniel brought in a forensic accountant to trace the payments. I did not ask him to tell me how much had been stolen. I wanted him to tell me what the records actually showed. He followed the money through the trust accounts, company accounts, reimbursements, and related entities. The preliminary review identified at least $4.26 million that had gone to businesses or accounts connected to Marcus and Vanessa. I remember sitting quietly when Daniel gave me the number, but he did not call it stolen. He was careful about that. We prove what happened before we decide what to call it. That sentence stayed with me because it reminded me that anger could not replace evidence. Then another transaction appeared. It was much larger. Someone had requested $6.8 million from the trust to purchase a roadside hotel. The proposal described the property as a possible safe senior living residence for me. The independent appraisal valued the property at approximately $2.9 million. The difference was almost $4 million. The seller also had a business relationship with Vanessa's family. There were already costs prepared for the transaction. A $410,000 amount had been allocated across the deposit, consulting fees, and preliminary transaction expenses. But the main trust funds had not yet left the account. Bank compliance had stopped the transaction. That detail mattered. For the first time, I could see the system as a whole. The $36,500 monthly payments were one thing, the hotel was another, the guardianship petition was another, but they all pointed in the same direction: control. If the hotel purchase had gone through, the trust would have bought the property. I would have been moved there under the guardianship arrangement. Marcus would have had authority over my finances. The trust would have paid for the property and its operating expenses, and I would have been living in a place purchased with my own money under rules I had never agreed to, managed by the person who asked the court to declare me incapable. That was when I stopped thinking about the hotel as an expensive real estate deal. It was something much more personal. It was a plan for where I would live. And if Marcus controlled where I lived, controlled the money that paid for it, and controlled the decisions made on my behalf, then the money was no longer just money. It was leverage. I thought about the furnace in my house, the $7,500 loan I had asked for, the admission packet waiting on my dining room table. I had spent years believing Marcus was helping me make life easier. Now I could see how easily making things easier could become making every decision for someone else. I looked at the appraisal again. $6.8 million requested, $2.9 million value. The numbers were almost impossible to ignore, but the part that stayed with me wasn't the difference, it was the purpose. He wasn't buying a home for me. He was buying a place where he could decide what my life looked like. The hotel transaction had given us a trail of money. The guardianship petition had given us a trail of decisions, but we still had to answer the question that mattered most in court. Was I actually incapable of managing my own life? That was where the medical records came in. The trust documents required 2 independent medical certifications before someone could exercise certain powers over my affairs. Marcus's side had submitted 2 documents. The first came from a cardiologist who had treated me after my surgery 8 years ago. That letter was real, but it did not say what the guardianship petition suggested it said. It described me as temporarily unable to manage complex decisions while I was recovering and taking medication. Temporarily. The second letter was different. It came from a neurologist and described probable vascular dementia and permanent incapacity. I had never met that neurologist. I knew every doctor I had seen around the time of my surgery. I remembered the hospital, the nurses, the follow-up appointments, even the pharmacy where I filled my prescriptions, but I had no memory of ever sitting in a neurologist's office. Claire called the medical office listed on the letter. There was no treatment record showing that I had been seen there. At first, that sounded like the answer we needed. Then reality made it harder. The neurologist had retired. The doctor had moved overseas. The older records had been purged under the office's retention policy.
The absence of a record did not prove the letter was fabricated. It only meant that the person who could have confirmed or denied the appointment was no longer easily available. Daniel was careful not to promise me a victory. He explained that suspicious evidence was not the same as provable evidence. We have suspicious evidence. We don't yet have enough evidence to prove who created it. We had documents that looked wrong. We had payments that needed explanations. We had a guardianship petition filled with claims I knew were misleading. But knowing something was wrong and proving exactly who did it were two different things. Then Marcus changed tactics. Instead of answering our questions, he attacked the people asking them. He accused Claire of manipulating me. He suggested that Daniel had a conflict of interest because he had represented Thomas and was now representing me. And then the story moved outside the family. A local article appeared with the headline, "Retired Architect at Center of Family Capacity Dispute." Neighbors who had known me for years began looking at me differently. Some became unusually careful when they spoke to me. Others avoided the subject altogether. I hated seeing my private life turned into something strangers could discuss over coffee. But the article taught me something important. Marcus was not only controlling documents, he was controlling the story people heard about me. If he could make me look confused, vulnerable, and dependent, then every ordinary mistake I made could be used as proof. I began to understand why the guardianship photographs had mattered so much. The photographs didn't need to show the whole truth. They only needed to create a believable version of it. And for a while, I was afraid that version might win. One evening after Daniel left, Claire and I sat at my kitchen table with folders spread between us. We had records, we had inconsistencies, we had numbers, but the strongest evidence still seemed to be missing. I finally said what I had been thinking for days. We had evidence of what he did. We still couldn't prove why. That was my lowest point. Not because I believed Marcus was innocent, because I was beginning to understand how difficult it could be to prove the truth when the person controlling the records had spent years making sure the truth was hard to find. Then Claire remembered something. Thomas had backed up his important documents every Sunday. After he died, Marcus took the laptop because he said he needed to organize the estate files. But there was another backup. Years earlier, Thomas had kept an external drive inside a cedar chest. I had forgotten about it. Marcus had never known it existed. Claire and I went to the bedroom and opened the chest. Under old photographs and a few of Thomas's architectural drawings was a small external hard drive. Beside it were several more drawings and a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front stopped me. It was Thomas's. The envelope had only one sentence written across it. "If anything happens to me, Evelyn and Claire should read this together." I held it in my hands. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel like we had reached the end of the evidence. I felt like we had just found the door to something neither of us had seen coming.
The envelope had Thomas's handwriting on it. I still had not opened it when Claire and I connected the backup drive to Daniel's computer. We did not expect one perfect recording or a single file that would explain everything. The drive was much more like Thomas himself, organized, careful, and full of things he had kept because he believed they might matter someday. There were emails, PDFs, scanned documents, drafts, old accounting files, and folders from the final years of his work. We spent hours opening them one by one. The first discovery was an email from 8 years earlier. Marcus had proposed moving some of Thomas's assets into a private investment partnership. The proposal was presented as a way to simplify management and increase returns. Thomas had refused. His response was short: too much leverage, too much control in one person's hands. I read that sentence twice. Thomas had not accused Marcus of stealing. He had not called him dishonest. He had simply recognized a risk: too much financial power concentrated in one person's hands. Then we found a note Thomas had written for his estate files. It said, "Do not let Marcus handle Evelyn's finances without independent review." That was not a criminal accusation. It was a warning from a husband who knew his wife and knew his son. The next discovery involved Claire. We found the original email chain from the period when I had stopped speaking to her. The real messages showed Claire telling Marcus not to pressure me while I was grieving and medicated. She wanted my decisions reviewed carefully. That matched the original email Claire had shown me. It also confirmed that the message I had received was not the whole story. Then Daniel found something I had never known to look for: revision history. One old document contained a draft medical letter. Its metadata showed that the file had been edited under Marcus Hart's user account. It was not by itself proof that Marcus had written the medical opinion, but it placed his account inside the history of a document that later became part of the guardianship evidence. For the first time, we had something more concrete than suspicion. Then we reached the furnace records. There was no message from Marcus saying, "Turn off the furnace." Instead, there was a work order from a contractor. The description stopped us. Create visible evidence of unsafe living conditions before evaluation. The person who had arranged the appointment was Hartwell Care Solutions, Vanessa's company. That mattered because the furnace was one of the strongest pieces of evidence used to make my home look unsafe. The record did not tell us everything. It did not tell us who gave the final instruction, but it connected the company receiving money from my trust to the creation of a condition later used in the guardianship case. That was the chain we had been missing. Daniel arranged a meeting with Vanessa. I went with him. She denied knowing what we were talking about at first. Daniel did not threaten her. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed the records on the table, one after another. The bank transfers, the care reports, the furnace work order, the hotel transaction, the document metadata. Vanessa looked at the papers for a long time. Then she asked, "What happens to me?" Daniel answered, "It depends on what you tell investigators." That was enough. Vanessa did not suddenly confess to everything. She did something more believable. She started providing records. She gave us invoices, the password to an old VDM backup, names of contractors, and an email chain we had not seen before. She explained that Marcus had told her the arrangement was temporary. He had told her that once the guardianship was in place, everything would be easier. She did not describe herself as the mastermind. She described herself as someone who followed Marcus because she believed the arrangement would eventually end. I did not excuse her, but I understood that evidence did not have to arrive as one dramatic confession. Sometimes it arrived in pieces from people who finally realized they had something to lose by staying silent. There was still one thing left on the drive. The recording was old. Thomas had made it when he was already very sick. I heard his voice before I saw the file finish loading. He was speaking directly to me. If one of the children ever tells you that you need to choose between them, don't choose either one. Choose the truth. I sat there without saying anything. I had spent 8 years believing I had failed to recognize what was happening around me. Thomas had seen the danger much earlier. He had not known exactly what Marcus would do. He had not predicted every document, every payment, or every decision. He had simply understood something about me. He knew I would trust my son. He knew that love could make me stop asking questions.
The emergency hearing began 3 weeks later. Marcus arrived with his attorney and continued to present himself as the son who had only been trying to protect his mother. His side showed the judge the post-surgery video, photographs of my furnace, unopened mail, small moments of forgetfulness, and concerns about my driving. I listened without interrupting. When it was my turn, I did not give a speech. The judge asked me specific questions. What day was it? How had I gotten to court? Who was the current president? How much was in my trust? Where did I want to live? Who did I want managing my assets? I answered each question clearly. Then an independent geriatric specialist reviewed my medical history and the evidence submitted against me. The conclusion was simple.
I had capacity. There was no clinical basis for permanent incapacity, and the evidence used to create that picture of decline was not reliable enough to support guardianship. Vanessa testified next. She presented the original $7,500 loan application, the bank's compliance alert, the pending $6.8 million hotel transaction, my authorization, and the trust accounting records. Then came the digital evidence. A specialist explained the document revision history, deleted drafts, metadata, and files recovered from Thomas's backup. The records did not depend on one perfect document. Together, they showed how pieces of the guardianship narrative had been created and altered. The furnace contractor confirmed that the furnace had not simply failed. The switch had been manually disconnected, and the work order had originated through Hartwell Care Solutions. The judge denied Marcus's request for guardianship. For a short period, an independent professional fiduciary was appointed to protect the trust while the financial records were reviewed. Once my capacity was confirmed, that arrangement ended. Marcus was removed as distribution advisor, and the trust's bad faith and forfeiture provision was activated according to its terms. The criminal investigation took more than a year. There was no dramatic next-day arrest. Investigators traced money through real estate, vehicles, company accounts, business records, medical documents. The trust eventually recovered about $3.4 million. The hotel purchase never happened, and the trust's principal remained around $31 million. Vanessa accepted a plea agreement after cooperating with investigators. She faced conviction, restitution, and court-ordered restrictions. Her cooperation did not make her innocent. It only meant she eventually stopped helping Marcus hide what had happened. Digital evidence also established Marcus's direct connection to the false medical document. He eventually pleaded guilty to the appropriate charges and received prison time, supervised release, and restitution. But that was not the ending I had imagined. When I saw Marcus again, he asked whether I was choosing Claire. I told him, "No, I'm choosing the truth." He reminded me that he was my son. I told him, "That's why this hurts. It doesn't mean the consequences disappear." After that, I stopped measuring my life by what Marcus had taken. I repaired my house. I fixed the furnace. I repaired the porch. I renovated the kitchen. I made one room comfortable for Noah. I did not buy a mansion or a luxury car. I did not need to prove that I was rich. Claire and Noah began coming to my house every Wednesday. Claire cooked dinner. Noah helped me measure a room. I worked on an old architectural drawing while they talked nearby. We did not pretend that 8 missing years had suddenly disappeared. We simply started making new, ordinary days. I also refused to make Claire my replacement decision-maker. I asked whether she wanted to become the next trust advisor. She said no. I was relieved. The lesson was never to choose the good child. It was to understand that no child should have unchecked power over another person's life. I kept independent professionals in charge of the trust. I still had about $31 million, but I no longer cared about that number the way I once did. For 8 years, I thought the thing I had lost was money. Then I thought it was my daughter. I was wrong. What I had lost was the right to make ordinary choices without asking someone else for permission. The first morning after everything was over, I woke up, walked downstairs, and turned the heat up 3 degrees because I was cold. No one asked me why. No one told me I couldn't. It was such a small thing, but after 8 years, it felt like freedom.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in, and what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.